All right, today we are diving headfirst into one of the biggest, oldest questions anyone has ever asked. Who created God? Now, just so we're clear, we're not going to tackle this from a place of faith or disbelief. Nope. We're going to treat this as a really fascinating logical puzzle. So, let's get into it.
So, first things first, we really need to understand why this question is so powerful. I mean, it just feels like it stops any conversation dead in its tracks, and there's a good reason for that. You know the scene, right? Someone makes an argument that the universe must have had a creator. And then someone else comes back with this question. It just completely flips the script. It takes the other person's logic and turns it right back around on them. It feels like the perfect unanswerable comeback.
And it feels like checkmate because it uses a rule we see every single day. Things don't just appear out of thin air, right? Everything around us, you, me, the planet, it all has a cause, a source, a maker. The question, who created God, just takes that universal rule and applies it one step further up the chain.
Okay, but to really get to the heart of the classic philosophical answer, we have to do something really important. We've got to look closer at a hidden assumption that's baked right into the question itself. The logic seems incredibly simple and just intuitive. Step 1, every single thing has a cause. Step 2, God is a thing. And so the conclusion is obvious. Therefore, God must have a cause too. I mean, on the surface, that seems totally airtight. And this is where philosophers and theologians for centuries have basically hit the pause button. They challenge us to look again, really look, at that first premise. Every single thing has a cause. Is that statement, exactly as it's written, always universally true? And that question brings us to this huge concept in philosophy, the law of causality. Now, the way we usually think about it is based on our daily lives, but the formal philosophical definition has this little twist, a crucial bit of nuance that completely reframes the whole debate. Check this out. See those 4 little words they added in there? That begins to exist? The refined law of causality doesn't just say everything has a cause. It says everything that begins to exist has a cause. And you know what? That little tweak opens up a brand new possibility. What if there's something that didn't begin to exist? So this distinction creates 2 totally different categories of existence. On one hand, you have what are called contingent beings. That's pretty much everything we know. Us, a tree, this planet. Our existence is contingent on something else. We had a beginning. But on the other hand, philosophers came up with this concept of a necessary being, something that exists simply because of its own nature. It couldn't not exist. It's totally self-sufficient, and this is the key part, it has no beginning. Okay, so with these 2 categories in our back pocket, the created and the uncreated, the contingent and the necessary, now we can go back to that original question and see how it holds up in this new framework. You see, in this philosophical system, the very definition of God is that of a necessary being. By definition, God is the one thing in this whole equation that does not have a beginning. It's uncaused, it's eternal, and if that's the case, then the law of causality, that everything that begins to exist needs a cause, well, it just wouldn't apply. So the question itself is what philosophers call a category error. It's a great phrase, right? It's like asking, how much does the color red weigh? Or what does Tuesday taste like? You're taking the rules from one category and trying to apply them to a totally different category where those rules just don't make sense. Here's a perfect, simple analogy to make this crystal clear. Let me ask you this. What's north of the North Pole? It's a nonsensical question, right? There is no north of the North Pole. Why? Because the North Pole is the very definition of the northernmost point. The question itself is based on a misunderstanding of its own terms. So let's take that exact same thinking and bring it all the way back to our original question. If the definition of God in this philosophical argument is the uncreated being, then asking who created God is the same as asking who created the uncreated creator. And there you have it. That's the core of the classic philosophical answer. The question basically short-circuits itself. It's built on a contradiction. You can't ask what caused the thing that is defined as being uncaused. So let's zoom out for a second. What does all this really mean? The point here isn't to prove or disprove anything. It's really about learning to spot the hidden assumptions in our questions and to think beyond our immediate physical world. To think outside the box of created things.
So let's just do a quick recap of the logical journey we took. We started with the question, and we learned it has a hidden premise, that everything needs a cause. Then we refined the law of causality to say it only applies to things that begin to exist. That led us to the idea of a necessary being, which by definition is uncreated. And from that point of view, asking who created that being becomes a logical contradiction, a category error.
Now, it is really, really important to remember this has all been about understanding the internal logic of one specific classic philosophical argument. Of course, there are tons of other arguments and counter-arguments out there, but our goal today was just to see how these particular puzzle pieces fit together, whether you ultimately agree with the starting point or not.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This whole exercise in logic is a great challenge for us to look at our own assumptions. I mean, how often do we ask questions that are kind of boxed in by our own limited experiences? What other big questions in life might look totally different if we could just find a way to step outside the usual framework we're so used to? Now that is a question worth thinking about.